What would you do if someone you loved was the victim of a cruel and violent act? How easily could one's mind tip towards violent retribution? How far would you go to bring the people responsible to justice? If you were successful, how would it change you? Would you ever be the same? With The Last of Us Part 2, we set out to create an experience that explores these difficult questions, the darkest sides of human nature, and the vicious cycles of violence that we witness in the world around us on a daily basis.
This was the foreword sent out with the collector's edition of The Last of Us Part 2. Violence and the consequences of a person's pursuit of vengeance can be clearly seen throughout the game. Ultimately, Joel, Ellie, and Abby's stories serve as a harrowing warning to the audience that allows us to better understand how we can fight against the most dangerous infection that has always plagued humanity: revenge. The world in The Last of Us 2 is an unforgiving and violent one. Joel, Ellie, and Abby have to constantly fight for their lives. As a result, when confronted with conflict, they react in a violent manner. The characters understand and accept that violence is the way of the world. Violence is the only way they know how to get what they want. Violence is what will allow them to bring those who wrong them to justice. The need for revenge has changed their world just as much as the infected have. Unfortunately, responding with violence is how we guarantee a violent end for ourselves. When being tortured by Abby, Joel says, "Why don't you say whatever speech you've got rehearsed and get this over with?" This shows how Joel has already come to terms with the fact that his violent past would catch up to him one day. Joel has survived in the post-outbreak world for over 20 years and has hurt many people and done many cruel things in that time. He and his brother, Tommy, spent time as hunters, ruthless scavengers who preyed on innocent people for supplies. Joel knew that one day one of the many enemies he had made would come looking for him. Joel meets his end at the hands of someone who he infected. Joel killed Abby's father and created a new cycle. Abby wanted revenge for the loss of her father and gave in to her rage and anger. Joel did not fight when his past finally caught up to him. He lived his life in a selfish and violent manner and accepted the consequences. But did his life have to end this way? Could he have made different decisions throughout his life and lived a more peaceful and fulfilling life as a result?
Ellie and Abby, much like Joel, both decided to play into the cycle of violence and revenge, and as a result, they have changed who they are and what they are capable of. Ellie and Abby both started out as young, relatively innocent girls. In the first game, Ellie was shocked by the violent manner with which Joel killed people. In the second game, Ellie becomes just as violent and cruel as Joel was. She even uses torture techniques Joel shared with her in the past. Similarly, Abby transformed her body and dedicated 4 years of her life searching for clues and hunting down Joel and Ellie. She made sure that she would be capable of dealing with whatever stood in her way. Moreover, Ellie's transformation can also be seen in her appearance as she grows thinner, more bruised, battered, and like a shell of her former self the further down the revenge path gets. Throughout their journey, Ellie and Abby are completely consumed by their thirst for revenge, and they commit horrendous acts of violence. As Nietzsche famously said, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." This is absolutely the case for Ellie and Abby as they continue to hunt each other down and murder anyone who stands in their way. They will stop at nothing to get their revenge, and they do not care what it will cost them to get it.
Even though their actions are having a clear negative impact on their psyches, and Ellie and Abby lose those closest to them, they continue to seek revenge. On their quest for revenge, Ellie and Abby kill each other's loved ones and have nightmares as a result of the traumatic violence and loss they experience. The game and story are structured so that you play 3 days as Ellie and then 3 days as Abby. This allows the audience to experience both of their perspectives and better understand the consequences of their actions. Every night of their respective 3 days, Ellie and Abby have flashbacks and nightmares that show how much the events of the story are impacting them. Furthermore, after Ellie and Abby's first big fight, Ellie develops PTSD and has an episode while living a quiet and peaceful life on a farm.
on, little dude.
Ellie? Hey, Ellie.
After deciding to go back out and hunt down Abby in California, Ellie talks to Dina about how her trauma is affecting her.
Hey.
Man, it's been a while since he slept this long, huh?
He had a day.
Yeah. He's fine. Go back to bed. We'll talk about it in the morning, okay?
I have to finish it.
You don't owe Tommy anything.
I don't sleep. I don't eat. I'm not like you, Dina.
What?
Ellie never wanted to end up alone. Her young life was filled with losing people she cared about. To make matters even worse for Ellie, without realizing it, she directly manifests her greatest fear, ending up alone.
When Ellie, Joel, and Abby sought out retributive justice, they decided to play into the cycle of violence. They were infected by the potent parasite known as revenge. They are suffering from the infection. The end of the infection for one person marks the start of the infection for another. Both infections lead to unbridled destruction and cause those infected to lose their agency as their pursuit of revenge becomes their sole reason for existing. Abby and Ellie both lose nearly everything and everyone they love as a result of their thirst for revenge. It's only at the very end of her journey that Ellie finally accepts that in order to be happy and no longer suffer as a result of losing Joel, she must forgive Abby. Just as Ellie is about to get her revenge, she recalls her last conversation with Joel.
You're such an asshole.
I'm not trying to.
I was supposed to die in that hospital. My life would have fucking mattered. But you took that from me.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
Yeah. I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
I like that.
Okay. I'll see you around.
Yep.
Ellie's flashback highlights her realization that she has to forgive in order to move on. Killing Abby will not bring Joel back. Violence begets violence, and an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind.
Forgiveness is the key to fighting off revenge, because unless you are willing, you cannot be controlled by violence. Revenge is a never-ending cycle that ravages everyone involved. Before their first major fight, while holding Ellie at gunpoint, Abby says,
You killed my friends. We let you both live. And you wasted it.
However, despite her rage, Abby found something to keep fighting for in Lev, just like Joel found his purpose in Ellie. Abby and Lev mirror Joel and Ellie's dynamic in this way. Abby spares Dina and Ellie because of her relationship with Lev, just as Ellie was able to forgive Abby because of her relationship with Joel. Things can be different in this cruel world, and Abby and Lev serve as an example of an alternative to violence. They deviate from violence and are able to defeat the infection by sparing Dina and Ellie. They show how Joel could have made different decisions and how he and those around him would have benefited from them. Joel didn't ask Ellie what she wanted when it came to creating the vaccine and sacrificing herself. The stubborn and selfish way Joel lived his life is not the only way. Joel was unable to forgive the world for taking his daughter Sarah from him. That's why he acted selfishly when he saved Ellie and was unwilling to take into consideration Ellie's desires and in turn what would benefit the world.
No. 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 Please. 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 Please don't. Please.
Ellie was finally able to break the cycle of revenge and eradicate her infection by forgiving Joel and in turn being able to forgive Abby. Just understanding that things can be different is an important step in being able to think about how things can change. Had Abby and Ellie not been able to forgive, then they would have suffered the same fate as Joel. Forgiveness is not a passive act, and letting go is more difficult than feeding into the temptations, revenge, and violence put forth.
The best forms of art allow us to examine humanity and better understand how we can avoid destroying ourselves and the world around us. The reason why we love this game so much is that even though it is a fictional story, its themes and teachings can be seen and applied to the world around us. We are our own worst enemies. Our inherent reaction to losing someone we love is to feed into the anger and rage. Desiring violent revenge is a natural reaction, but ultimately, the only things we can control are all internal. Oftentimes, the violent cycles we see play out on a daily basis are symptoms of revenge. Being able to forgive is an arduous personal battle. However, even though our journey to eradicate revenge is done on an individual level, we are not alone in our battle. Philosophies such as Stoicism and Buddhism give us insights that we can use to eliminate humanity's most destructive infection. We must understand that forgiveness is the vaccine that will ensure that revenge does not exterminate us. We must turn away from the darkness that consumes us when seeking revenge. We must continue to look for the light.